The year was 2009. The world watched as one of the most famous entertainers in history was carried away in an ambulance from a rented mansion in Los Angeles. Within hours, television networks interrupted regular programming. Radio stations abandoned playlists. Fans gathered outside hospitals, record stores, and city landmarks across continents. For millions of people, it felt impossible. Michael Jackson was gone. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. Because what happened next would become one of the strangest chapters ever witnessed in the history of modern music. Most artists disappear from the charts after death. Their records become memories. Their songs become nostalgia. Their voices slowly fade into history. But Michael Jackson seemed to do the exact opposite. In the years following his death, new recordings appeared. Previously unheard songs emerged. Albums were released. Singles climbed charts. Streaming numbers exploded. Younger generations who had never seen him perform suddenly became fans. And as the years passed, an unsettling question continued to surface. How could a man who died in 2009 continue releasing music and continue competing with living artists? The answer leads deep into the hidden machinery of the music industry: billion-dollar business deals, secret recording vaults, family disputes, legal battles, and one of the most valuable entertainment legacies ever created. Because Michael Jackson's death was not the end of his story. In many ways, it was the beginning of an entirely different one. And some people believe the industry never stopped profiting from his voice, even after he was gone. To understand how this happened, we have to go back long before the final headlines. Long before the ambulance. Long before the memorial. Long before the world said goodbye. We have to understand who Michael Jackson really was. Not just the performer. Not just the celebrity. Not just the controversy. But the artist. The businessman. The perfectionist. And the man who spent decades recording far more music than the public ever heard. By the time Michael Jackson entered adulthood, he had already lived several lifetimes in the public eye. He wasn't simply a successful musician. He was a cultural phenomenon. Beginning as the breakout star of the Jackson 5, he transformed from child prodigy into global superstar, eventually becoming one of the most recognized human beings on Earth. His 1982 album Thriller didn't just break records. It rewrote the definition of commercial success. The project became the best-selling album in music history and established a blueprint that countless artists would attempt to follow for decades. But behind the spectacle was a relentless creative process. Producers who worked with Jackson often described recording sessions that stretched for endless hours. Ideas were constantly being developed. Lyrics rewritten. Melodies adjusted. Entire songs abandoned. Multiple versions of tracks recorded. Like many elite musicians, Jackson rarely stopped creating. What the public heard represented only a fraction of what was produced. Inside recording studios around the world, unfinished songs accumulated. Demo tapes were archived. Experimental sessions were stored away. Alternative versions of familiar tracks remained untouched. And without realizing it, Michael Jackson was creating something that would become incredibly valuable after his death. A vault. Not a physical treasure chest, but a musical one. A collection of recordings that could continue generating interest long after his final performance. As the years passed, Jackson's career became increasingly complicated. Massive success brought equally massive scrutiny. His personal life became tabloid material. His finances were questioned. His business decisions were dissected. Allegations, investigations, lawsuits, media criticism, and endless public debate followed him throughout different periods of his life. Supporters argued he was unfairly targeted. Critics believed difficult questions remained unanswered. The divisions never completely disappeared. Yet through all of it, one reality remained undeniable. The public fascination never ended. Whether people admired him, criticized him, defended him, or questioned him, they continued paying attention. And attention is one of the most valuable currencies in entertainment. By the late 2000s, Jackson was preparing for what many expected would be one of the biggest comeback events in music history. The This Is It concerts promised to bring him back to the global stage. Tickets disappeared almost instantly. Fans traveled from around the world. The anticipation was enormous. Then everything changed. June 25, 2009. News alerts began appearing. Conflicting reports spread. Confusion dominated television coverage. And eventually confirmation arrived. Michael Jackson was dead at age 50. The reaction was immediate and unprecedented. Crowds formed across major cities. Record stores experienced surges in demand. Television ratings skyrocketed. Music sales exploded. People who hadn't listened to Jackson in years suddenly returned to his catalog. A generation that grew up with his music mourned. A younger generation discovered him. And within days, something extraordinary happened. Michael Jackson dominated the charts again. Albums that had been released years earlier surged back to the top. Digital downloads shattered expectations. His songs became unavoidable. It was as if the world had collectively pressed replay. But this wasn't simply a temporary wave of grief. Something much larger was taking shape. Because while fans were revisiting old music, executives were evaluating something else entirely. The future value of the Michael Jackson estate. When a major celebrity dies, their legacy often becomes a complicated business operation. Intellectual property remains. Music rights remain. Licensing opportunities remain. Publishing revenue remains. Film projects remain. Merchandise remains. And in Jackson's case, the scale was staggering. Reports indicated that his catalog, image, recordings, and associated rights represented one of the most valuable entertainment assets in existence. Suddenly, decisions had to be made. How much unreleased material existed? What could be completed? What should remain private? What would fans want to hear? And perhaps most importantly, what was Michael Jackson's legacy worth? The answer would eventually reach into the billions. As estate managers began examining available recordings, they reportedly discovered a significant collection of unfinished work. Some songs existed as demos. Others contained partial vocals. Some were closer to completion. Others required extensive production. The challenge became both artistic and ethical. How do you finish music from an artist who can no longer provide feedback? How do you know what he would have approved? How do you separate a rough idea from a finished vision? Those questions would soon ignite intense debate. Yet the commercial demand was undeniable. Fans wanted more. The industry recognized opportunity. And the first major posthumous releases began taking shape. When previously unheard Michael Jackson music started reaching the public, reactions were immediate. Some listeners were thrilled. For them, hearing a new Michael Jackson song felt almost miraculous. It created the illusion that the voice they missed had somehow returned. Others felt uncomfortable. They questioned whether unfinished recordings should be released at all. Could anyone truly know the artist's intentions? Were these projects honoring his legacy? Or exploiting it? The debate intensified with each release. Then came another complication. Authenticity. Some posthumous tracks became the subject of controversy as questions emerged regarding certain vocals. Disputes erupted. Family members raised concerns. Fans launched investigations online. Experts analyzed recordings. Lawsuits followed. The conversations became emotional and deeply divisive. For supporters, the releases represented celebration. For critics, they represented caution. And suddenly the story wasn't just about music anymore. It was about ownership, control, trust, legacy. Who gets to decide what happens after an icon is gone? The arguments stretched across years. Yet despite controversy, the numbers remained remarkable. Albums sold. Streams increased. Documentaries attracted viewers. Tribute productions generated attention. New generations continued discovering his work. And something extraordinary became impossible to ignore. Michael Jackson remained commercially relevant. Not for months. Not for a year. but for decade after decade. Even in an era dominated by streaming platforms, social media influencers, viral trends, and constantly changing tastes, his music continued attracting audiences. That kind of longevity is rare. Extremely rare. Most entertainment fades. Cultural memory shifts. New stars replace old ones. But Jackson occupied a different category. His catalog became part of popular culture itself. Songs played at weddings, sporting events, television shows, movies, social media videos, family gatherings. The music kept moving. And so did the revenue. Industry analysts frequently pointed to the Michael Jackson estate as one of the most successful examples of posthumous brand management ever seen. Business deals reportedly generated enormous income. Licensing agreements expanded his reach. Streaming platforms introduced his catalog to younger listeners. Major productions revisited his career, and each new project reignited public conversation. But success came with ongoing controversy. Questions about reputation never disappeared. Debates over media coverage continued. Fans remained fiercely protective. Critics remained vocal. The internet amplified every argument, every documentary, every interview, every accusation, every defense. The result was a cultural battle that seemed incapable of ending, and perhaps that explains why interest never faded. Michael Jackson wasn't simply an artist. He became a permanent topic of discussion, a figure whose impact extended beyond music into questions about fame, power, media, celebrity culture, and public memory. In many ways, his story became larger than any single album, larger than any single performance, larger than any single generation. And that may be the real reason his voice continued reaching the charts after his death. Not because technology allowed it. Not because corporations managed it. Not because archives existed. But because public fascination never stopped. The audience never truly left. Even now, years after his passing, millions continue listening. Millions continue debating. Millions continue discovering songs that were recorded long ago. The performer is gone. The conversations are not. The concerts ended. The audience remains. And perhaps that's the most extraordinary part of this entire story. Death ended Michael Jackson's life. It did not end Michael Jackson's presence. His voice still emerges from speakers. His music still finds new listeners. His legacy still generates headlines. His story still divides opinion. And his influence still shapes artists who were not even born when his greatest hits first dominated the airwaves. Few entertainers ever achieve that kind of permanence. Fewer still continue reaching chart success after death. Yet somehow Michael Jackson did. And maybe that leaves us with one final question. When a voice continues echoing through culture decades after the person behind it is gone, has the artist truly disappeared? Or have they become something far more powerful than fame itself? A legacy that refuses to fade. A story that refuses to end. And a name that continues commanding attention every time the music starts playing once again. If this story moved you, share your thoughts below. Do you believe posthumous releases preserve an artist's legacy, or should unfinished recordings remain untouched? Join the conversation. Subscribe for more deep investigations into the stories behind the world's most influential figures, and let us know which legendary story should be explored next. The deeper investigators looked into Michael Jackson's posthumous success, the more unusual the story became. Because this wasn't simply a case of an artist's old records selling well after a tragic death. That happens all the time. History is filled with musicians whose catalogs experience temporary spikes in sales following their passing. But Michael Jackson's case followed a very different pattern. The surge didn't disappear. It evolved. Year after year, the numbers remained astonishing. Streaming platforms that didn't even exist during the peak of his career suddenly became major engines of his continued success. Teenagers who had never experienced the Thriller era were adding his songs to playlists. Children born after his death were learning the moonwalk. Social media users were discovering performances recorded decades earlier and reacting as if they had happened yesterday. It was almost as though time had stopped working normally around Michael Jackson's catalog. The music industry noticed. Executives noticed. Competitors noticed. And perhaps most importantly, investors noticed. Because behind every iconic song exists a business structure most fans never see. Publishing rights. Master recordings, licensing agreements, distribution contracts, royalty systems, synchronization deals. These invisible mechanisms quietly generate enormous revenue. And few catalogs in entertainment history were as powerful as Michael Jackson's. To understand why, you have to look beyond album sales. Most people think musicians earn money primarily from selling music. In reality, some of the most valuable income comes from ownership. Ownership of songs. Ownership of recordings. Ownership of intellectual property. Ownership of brands. Jackson understood this better than many of his peers. Throughout his career, he developed a reputation not only as an entertainer, but as someone deeply interested in the business side of music. One of the most famous examples involved his acquisition of valuable music publishing assets decades earlier. The move shocked parts of the industry. Some observers considered it brilliant. Others considered it controversial. But few disputed its significance. It demonstrated that Jackson viewed music as more than performance. He viewed it as ownership. And ownership creates lasting value. That philosophy would have enormous consequences after his death. Because when estate managers began assessing his assets, they weren't dealing with a single revenue source. They were dealing with an entertainment empire. Music, publishing, licensing, merchandise, film rights, brand partnerships, image rights, international distribution. Each category represented opportunities. Each category represented risk. And each category required careful decisions. Behind closed doors, difficult questions emerged. How aggressively should the estate pursue new projects? How much exposure was too much? Would constant releases strengthen the legacy or weaken it? There was no simple answer. The world had never seen many situations comparable to this. The public only saw headlines. But behind those headlines existed a complicated balancing act involving lawyers, business executives, family members, financial advisors, record labels, and countless other stakeholders. Everyone understood one thing. The decisions being made would shape how future generations remembered Michael Jackson, and that responsibility carried enormous weight. As years passed, posthumous projects continued appearing. Some focused on music. Others focused on film. Some explored historical achievements. Others revisited personal controversies. Every release generated discussion. Every discussion generated attention. And attention remained one of the most valuable resources attached to the Jackson name. But something else was happening at the same time. A new generation of music consumers was emerging. This generation consumed entertainment differently. They didn't grow up waiting for radio stations. They didn't purchase CDs in shopping malls. They didn't experience music through the traditional gatekeepers of earlier decades. Instead, they lived inside algorithms, recommendations, streaming playlists, short-form videos, social media trends. And unexpectedly, Michael Jackson adapted remarkably well to this environment. Not personally, but culturally. His performances were visually unforgettable. His dance moves were instantly recognizable. His songs contained hooks that remained effective decades later. Clips circulated endlessly online. One viral video led to another. One reaction video led to another. One dance challenge introduced new audiences to old music. And suddenly, songs recorded years earlier were reaching millions of people who had never actively searched for them. The process became self-sustaining. Every new fan introduced more fans. Every rediscovery generated another wave of interest. The cycle continued. Then came another twist. Artificial intelligence. Technology began transforming entertainment in ways few people had anticipated. Questions emerged throughout the industry. Could deceased artists someday appear in new performances? Could voices be recreated? Could unfinished works be completed using advanced tools? Could technology extend creative legacies indefinitely? These discussions created excitement. They also created fear. Because Michael Jackson's story already existed at the center of a debate about artistic authenticity, now technology threatened to complicate that debate even further. Fans found themselves asking questions that previous generations never had to consider. If a song is completed after an artist dies, who is the artist? If technology assists production, where does creativity end and reconstruction begin? If audiences cannot distinguish between original and recreated material, what happens to trust? The questions didn't have clear answers, but they highlighted something important. Michael Jackson's legacy wasn't merely surviving. It was helping define future conversations about music itself. And those conversations often became intensely emotional. Nowhere was that more visible than online. Every time a new documentary appeared, social media erupted. Every interview triggered arguments. Every anniversary reignited debates. Supporters defended him passionately. Critics challenged those defenses. Neutral observers attempted to sort through conflicting information. The result resembled a permanent cultural battlefield. Unlike many celebrity discussions, these arguments rarely faded. They resurfaced repeatedly.